Everyone laughed at her struggles, until the undercover billionaire fell in love with her heart. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when David first saw her. She was sitting on the steps of the Riverside Community Center with everything she owned stuffed into 2 worn bags, soaked to the bone but holding herself like a queen. What stopped him wasn't her circumstances. He'd been working undercover in this neighborhood for 2 months and had seen plenty of people facing hard times. Before we continue this wonderful story, click subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're listening from. Now let's get to where the story began. What stopped him was watching 3 teenagers walk past her making cruel jokes about bag ladies and street trash, and seeing her react by sitting up straighter, opening her book, and reading like she was in the most beautiful library in the world instead of on wet concrete steps. David had never seen such quiet strength in the face of public humiliation. He also had never been more ashamed of the fact that he was worth $6.2 billion and was pretending to be a community outreach worker earning $35,000 a year, because what he was witnessing was exactly the kind of human suffering his wealth could solve in an instant, if anyone knew who he really was. But nobody knew who David really was. Not the staff at the community center. Not the residents who had begun to trust him with their stories. And definitely not the woman on the steps, who looked up as he approached and smiled with the kind of warmth that made him forget he was supposed to be gathering research for his foundation and remember that he was looking at a person whose strength was more impressive than any business success he'd ever achieved. "Excuse me," David said, opening his umbrella to shield both of them from the rain. "The community center is closed today because of flooding, but there's a warming shelter about 6 blocks east if you need somewhere dry." The woman looked at David with eyes that were smart, careful, and somehow amused, like she could see something about him that he didn't realize he was showing. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying education and intelligence that suggested her current situation wasn't the whole story of who she was. "I appreciate it, but I've been to that shelter. It's not safe for women traveling alone." David felt something twist in his chest as he realized what she was telling him, that she was choosing to sit in the rain rather than seek shelter because her safety mattered more than her comfort. "I'm Amber," she said, closing her book carefully and tucking it into a plastic bag. "And you're David, the new outreach coordinator. I've heard good things about you." David was surprised she knew who he was, and even more surprised that she'd been hearing reports about his work. "You've been asking around about me?" "I've been paying attention," Amber corrected gently. "When someone new starts working in a community like this, people notice. Especially when that someone actually listens instead of just collecting information for reports nobody reads." The observation was both accurate and sharp in a way that made David realize Amber had been watching him work with the same careful attention he'd been studying the neighborhood. "What have you heard?" Amber smiled, and David felt something electric shoot through his system that had nothing to do with the rain and everything to do with the way her face transformed when she looked genuinely happy. "I've heard that you helped Mrs. Rodriguez navigate housing applications that 3 other social workers told her were too complicated. I've heard that you spent your own money buying groceries for the Williams family when their food stamps got delayed. And I've heard that you're the first outreach worker in 5 years who bothers to learn people's actual names." David felt heat flush his cheeks, partly from embarrassment at being recognized for basic human decency and partly from something deeper, pride that this remarkable woman had noticed his efforts. "Those are just normal things to do," he said. "No," Amber replied firmly, "they're not. If they were normal, people wouldn't be talking about them like they're extraordinary." She gestured toward the community center where David had been spending 40 hours a week learning about poverty from people who were living it rather than studying it. Most people who work in social services are here because it's a job, not because they care about the individuals they're supposed to help. "You're different." "How?" Amber studied David's face with the kind of attention that made him feel like she was seeing something most people missed. You look at people like they have value that exists no matter what their circumstances are. Like being homeless or unemployed doesn't change someone's worth as a human being. The accuracy hit David like a physical blow, because it described exactly what he'd been learning during his 2 months undercover, that the people society dismissed were often the strongest, most genuine individuals he'd ever encountered. "What about you?" David asked. "How long have you been between housing situations?" He was trying to find language that respected her dignity, but Amber smiled at his careful words. "You can say homeless, David. It's not a dirty word, and it's not something I'm ashamed of." Amber shifted on the steps, making room for David to sit beside her under the small awning. "I've been without permanent housing for about 4 months. Before that, I was living in a studio apartment and working as a freelance graphic designer." "What happened?" Amber was quiet for a moment, deciding how much to share. "I got sick. Really sick, in a way that required surgery and months of recovery. I had insurance, but not the kind that covers everything, and definitely not the kind that covers missing work for extended periods." David felt that familiar twist in his chest as he realized he was listening to another story about how medical bills destroyed lives, the kind of problem his foundation was supposed to address, but which felt completely different when you were sitting next to someone who'd lived through it. "The medical bills used up my savings, the recovery cost me my freelance clients, and by the time I was healthy enough to work again, I was 3 months behind on rent with no way to catch up." "And your family?" Amber's expression shifted, showing a flash of pain she quickly controlled. "My parents died in a car accident when I was 22. No siblings, no extended family I'm in contact with. It's just me." David thought about his own family, parents who had left him an inheritance, siblings who worked in the family business, relatives who gathered for holidays in houses that cost more than most people earned in decades. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it in a way that went beyond polite sympathy. "Don't be sorry for me," Amber said firmly. "I'm not looking for pity. I'm just explaining how someone with a college education and a career can end up sitting on community center steps with everything they own in bags." She looked directly at David, and he could see pride in her eyes that was completely separate from her material circumstances. "It can happen to anyone, faster than you think. And it doesn't say anything about your intelligence or work ethic or worth. It just says that our safety net has holes big enough for entire human beings to fall through." David realized Amber was giving him a sociology lesson wrapped in personal experience, challenging assumptions about poverty most people never examined. "What are you reading?" he asked, noticing the book she'd been protecting. Amber pulled the book from its plastic bag, showing him a worn copy about user experience design. "It's about how the built environment affects human behavior. I'm trying to stay current with industry developments even though I can't afford to take on new projects right now." David stared at the book, understanding that Amber wasn't just maintaining her professional skills while homeless. She was actively preparing for when she could rebuild her career. "That's incredibly impressive." "It's incredibly necessary," Amber corrected. "The longer I'm out of the workforce, the harder it becomes to get back in. So I spend my days at the library reading design blogs, taking online courses when I can access Wi-Fi, working on spec projects for my portfolio." "Where do you shower, do laundry, charge your phone?" "The community center has day-use facilities 3 times a week. The laundromat on 5th Street has outlets where I can charge devices while washing clothes. The library has Wi-Fi and bathrooms and places to sit for 8 hours a day." David listened to Amber describe the complex logistics of maintaining hygiene and professional development while homeless, realizing she had created a routine that required more planning than his typical business schedule. "Amber," he said carefully, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything. I'll decide whether to answer." "Have you applied for assistance programs? Housing vouchers, job training, social services?" Amber laughed, but it wasn't bitter, more like someone who'd found genuine humor in an absurd situation. "David, I've applied for every program available in this city and 3 surrounding counties. Do you know what the waiting list is for housing assistance? 18 months. Do you know what the requirements are for job training programs? Permanent address and reliable transportation. She gestured around the neighborhood with its mix of struggling families and small businesses trying to survive. The system is designed to help people who have already solved the problems the system is supposed to help them solve. If you have a permanent address, transportation, and regular internet access, then sure, there are lots of programs to help you improve your situation. David felt ashamed of how little he'd understood about the practical barriers facing people who needed social services. But if you don't have those things, Amber continued, then you spend all your time managing basic survival and can't access the resources that might help you address the underlying problems. That's insane. That's America, Amber said with a shrug that suggested she'd accepted the systemic failures she was describing. But I'm not complaining. I'm fortunate compared to a lot of people in similar situations. How are you fortunate? I'm healthy now. I have marketable skills and education. I'm not dealing with addiction or mental health crises or domestic violence or any of the other complications that make homelessness even harder to escape. Amber looked around the neighborhood with something like genuine appreciation. And I've discovered that there are people like you, people who see individuals rather than problems, who treat everyone with dignity regardless of circumstances, who understand that circumstances can change but human worth is constant. David felt something shift in his chest that was deeper than attraction, though he was definitely attracted to this woman whose strength and intelligence were more compelling than any wealth he'd ever encountered. Amber, what if I told you I'd like to help you? Not as a social worker, but as someone who cares about your well-being and wants to see you rebuild the life you're working so hard to reclaim. Amber studied David's face, trying to determine whether his offer was genuine or the kind of savior complex that sometimes motivated people. What kind of help are you talking about? David realized he was stepping into dangerous territory, because any help significant enough to actually improve Amber's situation would require resources that a community outreach worker couldn't realistically possess. I might know about some resources that aren't widely advertised. Job opportunities, housing possibilities, programs that don't have the usual barriers. It wasn't exactly a lie. David did know about opportunities, because his foundation funded dozens of programs designed to help people in situations exactly like Amber's. But explaining how he knew about them would require revealing his true identity. David, Amber said gently, that's very kind, but I need you to understand something about accepting help. What? I've learned to be careful about assistance that comes with strings attached, even when those strings aren't immediately visible. People's motivations aren't always as pure as they appear. The observation made David realize that Amber had probably encountered men who offered help in exchange for things she wasn't willing to provide. I'm not asking for anything in return, he said. I just think you deserve better than sitting in the rain with nowhere to go, and if I can help make that happen, I'd like to try. Amber looked at David for a long moment, weighing the risks of trusting someone she'd just met. Can I think about it? She asked finally. Of course. But Amber. Yeah. Would you let me at least buy you dinner while you're thinking? There's a diner 2 blocks away that's warm and dry. Amber smiled, and David felt that electric shock again, stronger this time. I'd like that, she said. But I'm buying my own dinner. I may be homeless, but I'm not a charity case. As they walked through the rain toward the diner, David realized he'd just met the most remarkable person he'd encountered in 36 years of life, and that she was exactly the kind of person society had trained him not to notice. But more than that, he realized that Amber had challenged every assumption he'd made about poverty and human worth, not through lectures, but through the simple act of being herself with such dignity that it was impossible to see her as anything other than extraordinary. The question now was whether David could figure out how to help someone whose pride was as strong as her need, whose intelligence was sharper than most people he'd met in boardrooms, and whose circumstances were exactly what his wealth could address, if he could find a way to help without destroying the trust already growing between them. But what David didn't know was that someone had been watching their entire conversation from across the street. Someone who knew exactly who David really was. Someone who had very specific plans for what would happen to anyone who got too close to the truth about his identity. As David and Amber walked toward the diner, laughing about something she'd said, neither of them noticed the black sedan that began following them at a careful distance. By tomorrow morning, David would have to choose between maintaining his cover and saving Amber's life. Because in the world of billion-dollar fortunes, witnesses were a luxury nobody could afford. And Amber had just witnessed something that could destroy everything. The diner was the kind of place that had been serving the same comfort food for 30 years, with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that was strong enough to wake the dead. David and Amber slid into a corner booth, and David watched as Amber surveyed the menu with the careful attention of someone who had to make every dollar count. "The meatloaf special is good," David said. "Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans. Enough food for 2 meals if you want to save half for later." Amber looked at him with that same amused expression he was beginning to recognize. "You're very thoughtful about making sure I get the most nutritional value for my money without making it sound like charity," she said. "That's a skill that takes practice." David felt heat creep up his neck. "I just meant. I know what you meant. And I appreciate it." Amber closed her menu. "I'll take the meatloaf special." "And David? You don't have to be so careful about acknowledging my financial reality. I'm not going to fall apart if you mention that I'm broke." The waitress came over, a woman in her 50s who looked like she'd been working double shifts for most of her adult life. When she saw Amber, her expression softened with recognition. "Hey honey," she said warmly. "Haven't seen you in a couple weeks. How you been holding up?" "I'm doing okay, Linda. This is David. He works at the community center." Linda looked David up and down with the kind of assessment that mothers and protective older sisters specialized in. "Good to meet you, David. Any friend of Amber's is welcome here." She pulled out her order pad. "What can I get you too?" They ordered their food, and Linda disappeared into the kitchen. David realized that Amber had relationships and connections in this neighborhood that went beyond just accessing services. She was known here, cared about, treated as a valued community member despite her circumstances. "How long have you been coming here?" he asked. "About 3 months. Linda lets me sit and read for hours if I buy coffee and tip what I can. When I first became homeless, I spent a lot of time walking around the city trying to find places where I could exist without being asked to leave. That must have been exhausting." "It was educational," Amber said. "I learned which security guards would hassle me and which ones would leave me alone. I learned which libraries had the most comfortable chairs and the least restrictive policies about how long you could stay. I learned which restaurants had staff who saw homeless people as human beings versus staff who saw us as problems to be solved." David thought about the research his foundation had commissioned on homelessness, full of statistics and policy recommendations that suddenly seemed completely inadequate compared to the practical knowledge Amber had gained through lived experience. "What was the hardest part about becoming homeless?" he asked. Amber considered the question while stirring sugar into her coffee. "The invisibility," she said finally. "Not just that people don't see you, but that they actively work not to see you. They'll cross the street to avoid walking past you. They'll look through you like you're not there. They'll have entire conversations about the homeless problem while you're standing right next to them." She looked out the window at the neighborhood street, where people were hurrying past in the rain. "I realized that homelessness isn't just about not having a place to live. It's about being erased from the social contract. You stop being a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams, and you become a symbol of something that makes other people uncomfortable." David felt ashamed of how many homeless people he'd walked past in his lifetime without making eye contact, without acknowledging their humanity, without considering their individual stories. "But the weird thing," Amber continued, "is that you also discover who the genuinely good people are. Like Linda, who makes sure I have a warm place to sit when the weather's bad. Like Mrs. Rodriguez at the community center, who saves day-old pastries from her job at the bakery and brings them to share with anyone who needs them. Like you, David said, and immediately regretted how it sounded. Amber raised an eyebrow. Like me what? Like you're one of the genuinely good people. The way you talk about your situation, the way you maintain your dignity, the way you see the humanity in everyone around you even when they don't extend the same courtesy to you. Amber was quiet for a moment, and David worried he'd overstepped. David, she said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Okay. Are you interested in me romantically? The question caught David off guard, not because he hadn't been thinking about it, but because Amber's directness forced him to confront feelings he'd been trying to analyze since the moment he'd seen her on the community center steps. Yes, he said, because lying seemed pointless when she'd asked so directly. But not in a way that has anything to do with your housing situation or my ability to help you. I'm interested in you because you're remarkable. How am I remarkable? David looked at Amber sitting across from him in the diner, her hair still damp from the rain, wearing clothes that had seen better days but carrying herself with more grace than most people he knew who spent thousands of dollars on their appearance. You're the strongest person I've ever met, he said. You're facing circumstances that would break most people, and you're not just surviving, you're maintaining your integrity, your intelligence, your compassion for others. You're reading design books to stay current in your field while living out of bags. You're creating routines and systems that allow you to keep moving toward your goals even when everything is working against you. Amber listened without interrupting, but David could see her evaluating his words. And, he continued, you're teaching me things about humanity and dignity that I never learned in 36 years of whatever life I had before I started working in this neighborhood. What kind of life did you have before? David felt the familiar tension of trying to answer questions about his background without revealing his true identity. Different, he said. More comfortable financially, but less meaningful in terms of understanding how the world actually works for most people. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Were you married? Amber asked. No. Engaged once, but it didn't work out. What happened? David thought about Jessica, who had been perfectly suitable for someone of his social and financial status but who had never challenged him to think about anything beyond their shared circle of wealthy acquaintances. We wanted different things, he said. She wanted a lifestyle that looked successful from the outside. I wanted something more real. And you think I'm more real? I think you're the most real person I've ever met. Linda arrived with their food, and David was grateful for the interruption because the conversation was moving into territory that made him acutely aware of how much he was hiding from Amber. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, and David found himself studying Amber's face when she wasn't looking. Everything about her was precise and graceful, the way she cut her food, the way she listened to conversations at other tables, the way she seemed to take in information about everyone around her. Amber, he said as they finished eating, would you let me ask you something personal? We've been asking each other personal questions for an hour, she pointed out. This is different. Would you let me help you find temporary housing? Not a shelter, but maybe a weekly rental or extended stay situation where you'd be safe while you work on finding something permanent. Amber set down her fork and looked at David with an expression that was both appreciative and wary. That's a generous offer. It's also expensive, and I don't understand how a community outreach worker could afford to help someone with housing costs. David realized he'd walked directly into the trap of offering assistance that exceeded his supposed financial capacity. I have some savings, he said weakly. David. Amber's voice was gentle but firm. I've been homeless for 4 months. I've had a lot of people make offers to help, and I've learned to recognize when something doesn't add up. What doesn't add up? Your clothes are expensive. Not flashy, but well made in a way that costs real money. Your watch is nice. You offered to pay for dinner without checking the prices on the menu. You talk about resources and opportunities like someone who has access to systems most people don't even know exist. David felt his carefully constructed cover story beginning to crack under Amber's perceptive analysis. "And," she continued, "you're asking questions about my situation that sound less like social worker curiosity and more like someone who's trying to understand a problem he might have the resources to solve." David was quiet, unsure how to respond without either lying outright or revealing more than he was prepared to share. "I'm not judging you for having money," Amber said, "but I need to understand who I'm dealing with before I accept help that might come with expectations I'm not prepared to meet. What if I told you that my background is complicated, but my interest in helping you has nothing to do with expecting anything in return?" I'd say that complicated background could mean a lot of things, and some of them might put me in danger. The observation hit David like a physical blow as he realized that Amber was protecting herself not just from men who might expect sexual favors in exchange for assistance, but from people whose wealth or power might make them dangerous in ways she couldn't predict. "Amber, I would never do anything to hurt you or put you in danger." "I believe that you believe that," she said. "But powerful people don't always control all the consequences of their actions." David stared at Amber, understanding that she'd somehow figured out he had significant resources without knowing the specifics, and that her reluctance to accept his help came from wisdom about how power dynamics worked in the real world. "What if we started smaller?" he asked. "What if I helped you with a phone plan so you don't have to worry about losing contact with potential employers? What if I helped you get some professional clothes for job interviews? Things that would improve your situation without creating dependency?" Amber considered this for a long moment. "Why is it important to you to help me?" David looked at Amber's face, intelligent and beautiful and stronger than anyone he'd ever known, and realized he was falling in love with someone whose circumstances he could change completely if he revealed his true identity, but whose respect he might lose forever if she learned how much he'd been hiding from her. "Because," he said carefully, "I think you're extraordinary, and extraordinary people shouldn't have to worry about where they're going to sleep tonight." "And because you have feelings for me?" "And because I have feelings for you." Amber nodded slowly. "David, I need you to understand something about getting involved with someone in my situation." "What?" "My life is unstable in ways that affect everything. I don't know where I'm going to be next week or next month. I don't have privacy or personal space or the ability to invite you over for dinner or plan ahead for anything. Dating me means dating someone whose entire existence is focused on basic survival." David thought about his penthouse apartment with its panoramic city views, his house in the Hamptons, his ability to travel anywhere in the world without thinking about cost, his life of complete financial security and endless options. "I don't care about any of that," he said. "You say that now, but you've never tried to have a relationship with someone whose circumstances are this unstable." "Then let me try," David said. "Let me see if I'm someone who can handle caring about you regardless of your circumstances." Amber studied David's face with the kind of attention that made him feel like she was reading something written in a language only she understood. "Okay," she said finally. "But we go slow, and we're honest with each other about what this is and what it isn't." "What is it?" "It's two people who are attracted to each other and interested in seeing where that leads, with the understanding that my life is complicated in ways that might make a relationship impossible." "And what isn't it?" "It's not a rescue situation. I'm not looking for someone to save me, and you're not responsible for solving my problems." David nodded, even though he was acutely aware that he had the resources to solve Amber's problems completely and immediately. "Deal," he said. As they left the diner, David noticed a black sedan parked across the street that looked familiar, though he couldn't place where he'd seen it before. The windows were tinted, and he couldn't see inside, but something about it made him uneasy. "Amber," he said, "do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight?" "I'll be fine," she said, but David could hear the uncertainty in her voice. "The temperature's supposed to drop into the 30s. That's not safe for sleeping outside." Amber looked at David, and he could see her weighing her options. "There's a 24-hour laundromat where I can stay warm," she said finally. "It's not comfortable, but it's safe and dry. David thought about his apartment with its empty guest bedrooms, his ability to get Amber a hotel room without thinking about the cost, all the ways he could ensure her safety and comfort if he revealed his true identity. "Will you text me in the morning so I know you're okay?" he asked instead. "I don't have a working phone right now." David pulled out his phone and handed it to her. "Put your number in here. I'll add you to my plan tomorrow so you can call or text if you need anything." Amber looked at the phone, then at David. "This is a very expensive phone for someone who works at a community center." David realized he'd made another mistake that revealed more about his financial situation than his cover story could support. "I bought it before I took this job," he said, which was technically true. Amber entered her number and handed the phone back. "David." "Yeah. Thank you for dinner. And for seeing me as a person instead of a problem. Thank you for letting me." As David walked Amber to the laundromat, he was hyper-aware of their surroundings, still unsettled by the black sedan and the feeling that they were being watched. At the laundromat, he waited until Amber was safely inside before heading home. But as he walked toward his car, David couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. He was right. Within 12 hours, someone would try to kill Amber. And David would have to choose between maintaining his carefully constructed identity and using his real resources to save the life of the woman he was falling in love with. The game was about to begin, and the stakes were higher than either of them realized. David couldn't sleep. He'd been lying in his king-sized bed for 3 hours, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse apartment and thinking about Amber sitting in a 24-hour laundromat because she had nowhere else to go. The contrast between his comfort and her reality felt obscene. At 2:47 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Can't sleep either. Laundromat closed early for repairs. Walking around until morning. Don't worry about me." David sat up immediately. Walking around at night in below-freezing temperatures wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. He texted back, "Where are you? I'll come get you. Don't be crazy. You need sleep for work tomorrow." "Amber, it's 30 degrees outside. You could get hypothermia." "I've survived worse. Go to sleep, David." But David was already getting dressed. He grabbed his car keys and headed for the elevator, his mind racing through everything he knew about the neighborhood where Amber would be walking. Most of it was safe enough during the day, but at night, with fewer people around and more desperation, it became a different place entirely. He drove slowly through the streets, looking for any sign of her. The rain had stopped, but the wind was brutal, and he couldn't imagine how anyone could survive hours of walking in this weather. Finally, he spotted her near the bridge that crossed the river into downtown. She was walking fast, her arms wrapped around herself, stopping occasionally to warm her hands under the streetlights. David pulled over and rolled down his window. "Get in the car, Amber." She turned, surprised to see him. "David, what are you doing here?" "I'm making sure you don't freeze to death." "Get in." "I told you I'd be fine. And I told you I care about what happens to you. Please, just get in the car." Amber looked at David's face, then at the warm interior of his car, then back at the empty street where the wind was cutting through her jacket like it wasn't there. "Just for a few minutes," she said, getting into the passenger seat. "Until I warm up a little." The relief David felt when she closed the door was overwhelming. He turned up the heat and watched as Amber held her hands in front of the vents. "Your car is really nice," she said, looking around at the leather interior and high-tech dashboard. "Another thing that doesn't match your community center salary." David had been dreading this conversation, but he couldn't avoid it any longer. "Amber, I need to tell you something about my background." She turned to look at him, her expression wary. "What kind of something?" "I haven't been completely honest with you about who I am." The temperature in the car seemed to drop despite the heater running full blast. Amber's face went carefully neutral, the same expression David had seen her wear when the teenagers were mocking her outside the community center. "What haven't you been honest about?" David took a deep breath. This was the moment that would either deepen their connection or destroy it completely. I do work at the community center, and everything I've told you about why I'm there is true. But I'm not doing it because I need the job. Why are you doing it? Because I wanted to understand how poverty actually affects people's lives, not just read about it in reports. Because I wanted to learn what I could do to help that would actually matter. Amber was very quiet, processing what David was telling her. So you have money, she said finally. Yes. A lot of money? David hesitated, knowing that once he answered this question, there would be no going back. Just a lot of money. Amber stared out the windshield at the empty street, her face unreadable. How much money, David? Enough that I could solve your housing situation permanently without thinking about the cost. That's not an answer. David gripped the steering wheel, knowing that the truth would change everything between them. Billions, Amber. I'm worth billions of dollars. The silence that followed was the longest 30 seconds of David's life. You're a billionaire, Amber said slowly, like she was testing how the words sounded. Yes. And you've been pretending to be a social worker making $35,000 a year. Yes. Why? Because I wanted to understand what life was really like for people who don't have financial security. Because I wanted to learn how to help in ways that actually matter instead of just writing checks and feeling good about myself. Amber turned to look at David, her eyes searching his face. And because you wanted to meet people who would be interested in you for reasons that had nothing to do with your money. That wasn't the original plan, but yes. So when you met me, when you offered to help me, when you asked me out to dinner, all of that was happening while you knew you could solve every problem in my life with pocket change. David felt sick hearing it put so bluntly, but he couldn't deny the accuracy of what Amber was saying. Yes. Amber was quiet again, and David could see her working through the implications of what he'd revealed. David, do you understand why this is a problem? Because I lied to you about who I was. Because you took away my ability to make informed decisions about my own life, Amber said, her voice steady but firm. Because you let me sit here worrying about where I was going to sleep tonight while you knew you could put me up in the nicest hotel in the city without thinking about it. I was trying to respect your independence. No, you were trying to protect your experiment. You were trying to see how long you could maintain your disguise while studying me like a research subject. The accusation hit David like a physical blow because it contained enough truth to be devastating. That's not how I see you. How do you see me, David? I see you as the most remarkable woman I've ever met. I see you as someone whose strength and dignity and intelligence have nothing to do with your financial circumstances. I see you as someone I'm falling in love with. Amber looked at David for a long moment, and he could see her weighing everything he'd told her. You're falling in love with me. Yes. The billionaire is falling in love with the homeless woman. Yes. Do you see how that sounds, David? Do you see how it sounds like the plot of a movie where the rich guy saves the poor girl and everyone lives happily ever after? This isn't a movie, Amber. My feelings for you are real. Your feelings for me might be real, but they're based on a relationship where you had all the information and I had none. Where you could choose how much to reveal about yourself while I was being completely honest about everything. David realized that Amber was right. Their entire connection had been built on a fundamental imbalance of power and information that made genuine equality impossible. What do you want me to do? He asked. I want you to take me back to the laundromat and leave me alone so I can figure out how to process this without your money and your guilt and your need to rescue me complicating everything. Amber, please don't. David. Her voice was firm. I need space to think. This isn't a rejection, but it's not an acceptance either. It's me asking for time to figure out what this means and what I want to do about it. David started the car, his heart breaking as he realized that his honesty might have cost him the best thing that had ever happened to him. As they drove back toward the laundromat, Amber spoke again. Can I ask you one more question? Anything. If you hadn't met me, would you have kept working at the community center indefinitely? Or was this always going to be a temporary thing where you learned your lessons about poverty and went back to your regular life? David thought about the question, recognizing it as a test of whether his commitment to understanding and addressing inequality was genuine or just a wealthy person's phase. I don't know, he said honestly. I'd like to think I would have stayed, but I can't know for sure because meeting you changed everything for me. Changed it how? It made the work personal. It made me understand that helping people isn't about solving abstract problems. It's about caring about specific individuals whose lives matter. They reached the laundromat, which was still closed. David could see that Amber was going to have to keep walking until morning or find somewhere else to stay warm. The laundromat's still closed, he said. I'll figure something out. Amber, you can't walk around all night in this cold. David, I've been homeless for 4 months. I know how to survive. But as she opened the car door, David saw something that made his blood run cold. The black sedan he'd noticed earlier was parked across the street with its engine running. Amber, wait. What? Don't get out of the car. Why not? David pointed toward the sedan. That car has been following us. I saw it earlier outside the diner, and now it's here. Amber looked where David was pointing, and he could see fear flash across her face before she controlled it. Are you sure it's the same car? I'm sure. As if responding to their attention, the sedan's headlights turned on, and it began moving slowly in their direction. David, we need to leave. Now. David put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, watching in his rearview mirror as the sedan began following them. Why would someone be following me? Amber asked. David's mind was racing through possibilities, none of them good. If someone had discovered his real identity and was tracking him, Amber could be in danger simply because she'd been seen with him. It might not be about you, he said. It might be about me. What do you mean? If someone figured out who I really am, they might be interested in anyone I spend time with. The sedan was keeping pace with them, staying close enough to maintain visual contact but far enough away to avoid being obvious about the surveillance. David, what kind of enemies does a billionaire have? Business competitors, people who might want to kidnap me or someone I care about for ransom, people who might want to use my connections for their own purposes. As David said it, he realized how insane it sounded and how real the danger might be for Amber. So by being seen with me, you've put me at risk. I don't know. Maybe. I'm sorry, Amber, I never thought. Where are we going? David looked at the fuel gauge and the empty streets around them. They couldn't drive around all night, and they couldn't go back to places where Amber usually stayed if someone was watching her. My apartment, he said. It's secure, and I can call my security team to find out what's going on. Your security team? Yes. Because billionaires have security teams. Yes. Amber was quiet as David drove toward his building, the sedan maintaining its distance behind them. David. Yeah. When we get to your apartment, I want you to tell me everything. Not just about your money, but about what kind of life you're living that requires security teams and might put people around you in danger. Okay. And then I want you to help me figure out how to get out of whatever situation your presence in my life has created. David felt his heart break a little more, understanding that Amber was preparing to walk away from him to protect herself from dangers she'd never asked for. But as they pulled into the underground garage of his building and he saw the sedan continue past without following them inside, David realized that this night was either going to end their relationship forever or force them to decide whether their feelings for each other were strong enough to survive in the real world of wealth, power, and the dangers that came with both. The valet who took David's keys looked surprised to see him with a companion, especially one who clearly wasn't from his usual social circle. As they rode the elevator to the 47th floor, David watched Amber's face as she processed the reality of his wealth, the private elevator, the security codes, the kind of building where penthouses cost more than most people earned in their lifetimes. How long have you lived here? She asked. 6 years. And you've never brought anyone from the community center up here before? No. So I'm the first person from your volunteer work to see how you actually live. Yes. The elevator doors opened onto David's apartment, and David watched Amber take in the floor-to-ceiling windows, the art, the furniture, the view of the city spread out below them. "This is beautiful," she said quietly. "Thank you. It's also completely insane that you were pretending to worry about the cost of dinner when you live in a place like this." David didn't know how to respond to that, because she was absolutely right. "Amber, I know this is a lot to process. David, I need you to call your security team right now and find out who was following us and why. Because if being in a relationship with you means living in fear for my safety, I need to know that before I decide whether your feelings for me are worth the risk." David pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd hoped he'd never have to use. Within minutes, he would learn that the danger to Amber was worse than either of them had imagined, and that saving her life would require him to use every resource at his disposal, while risking the chance that she might never forgive him for the deception that had brought them together. But first, they had to survive the night. Because the people in the black sedan weren't just watching. They were planning to eliminate anyone who could connect David to his work in the community. And Amber had just become their primary target. The phone rang twice before Marcus answered. "Sir, I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight." David's head of security sounded alert despite the late hour, which meant he'd been expecting trouble. "Marcus, I need you to run a trace on a black sedan that's been following me. License plate." David closed his eyes, trying to remember. "I couldn't get the full number, but it was tailing me for at least 2 hours tonight." "Sir, we've been monitoring some unusual activity around your volunteer work location. I was planning to brief you in the morning." David felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of unusual activity?" "Someone's been asking questions about your identity at the community center. Professional questions, from people who know how to gather information without raising alarms." Amber was sitting on David's couch, looking small and vulnerable in his massive living room. She was listening to every word, her face growing more concerned as the conversation continued. "What kind of people, Marcus?" "The kind who charge significant fees for making problems disappear permanently." The words hit David like a physical blow. He walked to the window, looking down at the street 47 floors below, searching for any sign of the sedan or other surveillance. "How long have they been watching?" "At least a week, possibly longer." "Sir, whoever hired them has significant resources and very specific goals." "What goals?" "They want to know who you really are, who you've been spending time with, and whether your volunteer work represents a security risk to their interests." David looked at Amber, who was watching him with growing alarm. "Marcus, I need you to run protection on someone immediately." "Sir?" "Her name is Amber. She's been staying in the Riverside neighborhood, and she's with me now. I believe she may be in danger because of her association with me." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, with respect, getting involved with civilians while maintaining your cover identity creates exactly the kind of complications we've been trying to avoid." "I understand that, Marcus. But the situation has changed, and I need you to treat her safety as a priority equal to mine." "Understood. I'll have a team in position within the hour." "And Marcus? I want to know who's asking questions and why. I want to know tonight." "I'll make some calls." David hung up and turned to face Amber, who was staring at him with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Professional killers," she said quietly. "You just asked your security chief about professional killers." "I asked him about people who might be a threat to our safety." "David, don't manage my reaction to this. You just told me that someone has hired people to eliminate anyone connected to your volunteer work. That includes me." David sat down across from Amber, wanting to comfort her but unsure whether his touch would be welcome given everything that had happened in the past few hours. "I'm going to keep you safe," he said. "Whatever this costs, whatever resources I have to use, nobody is going to hurt you." "Why is someone trying to hurt me at all?" I'm homeless. I have no money, no power, no connections. I'm nobody. You're not nobody, Amber. And whoever is doing this doesn't care about your circumstances. They care about the fact that you've been seen with me. Amber stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. So this is what your world is like. People get killed just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. This isn't normal, Amber. I've never had anyone threaten people I care about before. But you've always known it was possible. David realized she was right. He'd always understood that his wealth and power came with risks, but he'd been insulated from those risks by security teams and careful management of his public profile. Yes, he admitted. I've always known it was possible. And you still chose to get involved with me without telling me about those risks. You didn't think about how your choices would affect my safety because you were focused on your own experience, Amber said, turning away from the window to face him. You were thinking about what you wanted to learn, what you wanted to feel, what you wanted to discover about yourself. The accuracy of her observation made David feel sick with shame. You're right. I was selfish. Selfish doesn't cover it, David. Selfish is forgetting to call when you're running late. This is something else entirely. Before David could respond, his phone rang again. Marks. Sir, I have preliminary information. Go ahead. The people asking questions work for a firm called Blackwater Solutions. They specialize in corporate intelligence and what they call reputation management for high-net-worth individuals. Who hired them? Still working on that, but the timing suggests it's connected to your foundation's recent acquisition discussions. David felt his blood run cold. For the past 6 months, his foundation had been negotiating to buy several properties in the Riverside neighborhood for conversion into affordable housing. The deals were worth hundreds of millions of dollars and would displace several businesses that had been operating in the area for decades. Marcus, pull up everything we have on the Henderson Group properties. Already on it, sir. 3 of the properties you're looking to acquire are owned by shell companies that trace back to the Henderson Group. And if those sales go through, Henderson Group loses approximately $200 million in projected development profits. Amber was watching David's face, reading his expressions as the pieces of the puzzle came together. Sir, there's more. Henderson Group has a reputation for using extreme measures to protect their interests. They've been linked to intimidation campaigns against community activists in 3 other cities. What kind of intimidation? The kind that sometimes results in people disappearing. David closed his eyes, understanding that his volunteer work at the community center hadn't just been about learning to understand poverty. It had put him directly in the middle of a conflict between his foundation's housing initiative and a development company willing to kill to protect their profits. Marcus, I want protection on Amber immediately. And I want everything we can find on Henderson Group's current operations. Sir, we should also consider whether you want to continue with the property acquisitions. If you walked away from the deal. I'm not walking away, David said firmly. Those properties are going to become affordable housing whether Henderson Group likes it or not. He hung up and looked at Amber, who had heard enough of the conversation to understand the basics of what they were facing. So let me see if I have this right, she said. You're buying properties to build affordable housing. The current owners stand to lose millions of dollars if you succeed. So they hired people to find out who you are and eliminate anyone who might interfere with their plans to stop you. That's about right. And I'm someone who might interfere because I've been seen with you. Yes. So the fact that I'm homeless and powerless doesn't matter. I'm still a target because I know who you really are. Amber, I'm going to fix this. How are you going to fix people wanting to kill me, David? By using every resource I have to keep you safe while we figure out who's behind this and how to stop them. Amber sat back down on the couch, her face pale but determined. What does that mean exactly? Armed guards following me around? Living in safe houses? Never being able to go back to my normal life? It means whatever it takes to keep you alive. And what if what it takes is you walking away from the affordable housing project? What if the only way to get these people to leave me alone is for you to give them what they want? David stared at Amber, realizing she was asking him to choose between her safety and a project that would provide housing for hundreds of families like hers. I can't do that, Amber. Too many people are counting on those houses. So you're willing to risk my life for your housing project? I'm willing to risk everything to protect both you and the project. That's not the same thing. Before David could respond, the lights in his apartment went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, but the main power was gone. David's phone showed no signal. Marcus! David called out, knowing his security chief wouldn't be able to hear him. David, what's happening? Someone's cutting us off from outside communication. As if to confirm his fears, David heard the distinctive sound of the elevator moving in his building. Someone with access to the building's systems was coming up to his floor. Amber, we need to leave. Now. Leave how? We're 47 floors up. David moved quickly to a panel hidden behind a painting on the wall. Inside was an emergency communication system and a small arsenal of weapons. Every building like this has emergency evacuation protocols for exactly this kind of situation, he said, handing Amber a small device that looked like a modified cell phone. If we get separated, press the red button. It will connect you directly to my security team and give them your exact location. David, I don't know how to use weapons or escape from professional killers. This isn't my world. It's not mine either, but we're both going to learn tonight. The sound of the elevator was getting closer. David estimated they had less than 2 minutes before whoever was coming reached his floor. He led Amber to what looked like a section of wall in his bedroom. When he pressed a hidden button, a panel slid away to reveal a narrow staircase. This leads to a secure room on the floor below. From there, we can access the building's emergency systems and call for help. You have a secret passage in your apartment. I have security measures that seemed paranoid until about 5 minutes ago. They could hear voices in the hallway outside David's apartment now. Professional voices, calm and efficient, discussing how to bypass his security systems. Amber, whatever happens, I need you to know that everything I told you about my feelings for you was real. The money, the deception, all of that was complicated, but caring about you isn't complicated. David, save the emotional confessions for when we're not about to die. They made it to the secure room just as David heard the sound of his apartment door being breached. The room was small but equipped with communication equipment, security monitors, and what looked like enough supplies to last several days. On the monitors, David could see 3 figures moving through his apartment, searching methodically for any sign of where he and Amber had gone. They're professionals, Amber observed, watching the way the intruders moved. They know exactly what they're doing. Yes. And they're here to kill us. Yes. David activated the room's communication system and reached Marcus immediately. Sir, we've been monitoring. Henderson Group moved faster than we anticipated. How fast can you get to us? We're in position in the building lobby, but they've disabled the elevators and blocked the main stairwells. We're working on alternative access routes. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less. David looked at the monitors showing the intruders expanding their search pattern. In 20 minutes, they would inevitably find the hidden room. Marcus, that might be too long. Sir, there's something else you need to know. Henderson Group isn't just trying to stop your property acquisition. They're trying to eliminate you as a competitor permanently. What do you mean? They've hired teams in 3 cities where your foundation operates. This isn't just about the Riverside properties. This is about removing you as an obstacle to their business interests altogether. David felt the full scope of what they were facing hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a single incident they could survive and move past. This was the beginning of a war between his foundation's humanitarian goals and a corporation willing to commit murder to protect their profits. Amber, he said quietly, I need to tell you something else. What else could there possibly be? This isn't going to end tonight. Even if we get out of this building safely, Henderson Group is going to keep coming after us until either we're dead or they are. Amber stared at David, the reality of their situation sinking in. So by caring about me, you've made me a target for the rest of my life. By caring about you, I've given you a reason to fight for something bigger than either of us. What's bigger than staying alive? David looked at the monitors showing Henderson Group's operatives searching his apartment, then at Amber's face, beautiful and terrified and angry and brave all at once. Making sure that people like you have places to live. Making sure that companies like Henderson Group can't destroy communities just to increase their profits. Making sure that what we're building together is worth the risks we're taking. Amber was quiet for a long moment, processing everything David had told her. David, if we get out of this alive, I need you to promise me something. Anything. I need you to promise me that you'll never again make decisions about my life without consulting me first. If we're going to face this together, we're going to face it as equals, even if your money means we'll never be equals in the way the world sees us. I promise. And I need you to promise me that if there's ever a choice between my safety and the safety of the people your housing project is supposed to help, you'll choose the people. David looked at Amber, understanding that she was asking him to value the lives of strangers over her life if it came down to that choice. Amber, I can't. You can and you will. Because that's what I would choose, and if you really care about me, you'll honor what I would want. On the monitors, one of the intruders was examining the wall where David's hidden panel was located. They had maybe 5 minutes before the room was discovered. I promise, David said. But now how do we get out of here alive so we can save the world together? David looked at the escape routes available from the secure room, calculating risks and probabilities. We fight our way out, he said. And we hope that loving each other is enough to keep us alive long enough to figure out how to win this war. As the first explosion echoed through the building, David realized that everything in both their lives had just changed forever. The question now wasn't whether they would survive the night. The question was whether they would survive each other. The explosion shook the entire building. David grabbed Amber's hand as debris rained down from the ceiling of their hidden room. On the security monitors, he could see that Henderson Group's operatives had blown a hole in the wall where his secret panel was located. They found us, Amber said, her voice remarkably steady considering they were about to die. Not yet, but they will in about 3 minutes. David opened another hidden panel, revealing what looked like military-grade equipment. Body armor, weapons, and communication devices that were far more advanced than anything a normal security team would carry. David, what exactly did you do before you became a billionaire philanthropist? That's complicated. We might die in the next 10 minutes. Uncomplicate it. David handed Amber a lightweight bulletproof vest, his hands moving with the kind of efficiency that came from extensive training. I didn't inherit my money, Amber. I earned it by selling a company I built to the government. What kind of company? The kind that develops security systems for people who have enemies that want them dead. Amber stared at David as the pieces clicked into place. You're not just some rich guy playing at social work. You actually know how to handle situations like this. I know how to survive. Whether I can keep both of us alive while fighting off professional killers is a different question. The sounds of Henderson Group's operatives getting closer were echoing through the building's ventilation system. David estimated they had maybe 2 minutes before the hidden room was breached. Amber, I need you to listen very carefully. We're going to move through the building's service corridors to reach the roof. From there, my security team can extract us. What about the people trying to kill us? We're going to have to go through them. David activated his communication system one more time, reaching Marcus despite the building's compromised networks. Marcus, we're moving to Extraction Point Alpha in 3 minutes. Sir, Henderson Group has teams positioned at all major exit points. The roof is your best option, but you'll have to fight your way there. How many hostiles? At least 6 in the building, possibly more. Sir, there's something else you need to know. What? We intercepted communications between Henderson Group and their clients. This operation isn't just about stopping your affordable housing project. David felt ice form in his stomach. What else is it about? They've been hired to eliminate you and anyone connected to you as part of a larger campaign to prevent low-income housing development in 12 major cities. 12 cities? Sir, your foundation's work has been more effective than you realized. You've been stopping development projects worth billions of dollars in combined profits. Henderson Group's clients want you removed as a permanent obstacle to their business interests. David looked at Amber, understanding that the scope of what they were facing was far beyond anything he'd imagined. Marcus, who are the clients? A consortium of real estate development companies, investment firms, and political organizations. They call themselves the Urban Growth Alliance. Never heard of them. That's intentional, sir. They operate through shell companies and intermediaries. But their membership includes some of the most powerful people in American real estate development. The sound of power tools cutting through metal echoed from above them. Henderson Group's operatives were cutting through the secure room's reinforced door. Marcus, we're out of time. Sir, one more thing. The woman with you, Amber. We ran a background check after you requested protection for her. David looked at Amber, who was adjusting her bulletproof vest with movements that suggested she'd worn military equipment before. What did you find? She's not who she told you she is. David felt the world shift around him as he realized that Amber had been keeping secrets too. What do you mean? Her real name is Amber Rodriguez. She's not just a freelance graphic designer who became homeless due to medical bills. Then who is she? She's a former military intelligence officer who was discharged 2 years ago after investigating corruption in defense contracting. She's been living under an assumed identity because she has information that could expose weapons procurement fraud worth hundreds of millions of dollars. David stared at Amber, who was checking the weapon he'd given her with the kind of professional competence that came from extensive combat training. Amber! She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, her expression was completely unguarded. David, we need to talk. But first, we need to not die. You're military. Former military. And yes, I know how to handle weapons and tactical situations and all the things you've been trying to protect me from. Why didn't you tell me? Because I've been hiding from people who want me dead for the same reason you're hiding from people who want you dead. Because I thought you were just a nice social worker who couldn't possibly be connected to the kinds of enemies I was running from. The secure room's door exploded inward, filling the space with smoke and debris. Move, Amber said, her voice carrying military authority that David had never heard before. They exited through a ventilation shaft that led to the building's service corridors. David followed Amber, realizing that she was navigating the building's layout with skills that went far beyond anything a graphic designer would possess. How long have you known who I really am? David asked as they moved through the narrow passages. I figured it out the night you took me to dinner, Amber replied, checking corners with movements that were pure military training. Your watch cost more than most people's cars. Your clothes were expensive in subtle ways that only someone with real money would choose. And you asked questions about poverty that sounded like someone trying to understand a problem he had the resources to solve. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was trying to figure out if you were connected to the people who've been hunting me for 2 years. They reached a junction in the service corridors where they could hear Henderson Group's operatives moving through the building below them. Amber, what information do you have that's worth killing for? Evidence that defense contractors have been selling weapons to terrorist organizations while billing the American government for equipment that was never delivered to our military. How much money are we talking about? $8 billion in fraudulent contracts over 6 years. David stopped moving, the scope of what Amber had just told him hitting him like a physical blow. You have evidence of $8 billion in weapons fraud? I have documents, recordings, financial records, and photographs that would send about 40 people to federal prison for the rest of their lives. Where is this evidence? Hidden in places where only I can access it. They could hear Henderson Group's operatives getting closer, their voices echoing through the building's ventilation system. Amber, is it possible that the people trying to kill us aren't just about my affordable housing project? What do you mean? What if Henderson Group was hired by the same people you've been hiding from? What if they figured out that we're connected and decided to eliminate both problems at once? Amber went very still, processing the implications of what David was suggesting. If that's true, then this isn't about stopping your foundation's work. This is about preventing two different exposures that could cost the same group of people billions of dollars. The Urban Growth Alliance that Marcus mentioned, what if they're connected to the defense contractors you investigated? David, if the same people are behind both conspiracies, then we're not just fighting for our lives. We're fighting against a network of corruption that goes all the way to the top levels of American business and government. The sound of footsteps in the service corridors was getting closer. They had maybe 30 seconds before Henderson Group's operatives reached their position. Amber, do you trust me? Do I have a choice? We can try to reach the roof and escape, or we can use what we know to fight back against everyone who's trying to kill us. What does fighting back look like? David thought about his foundation's resources, his security team, his connections in media and government, and the evidence that Amber possessed. It looks like exposing everything. Your weapons fraud evidence, my foundation's research on housing corruption, Henderson Group's assassination attempts, the Urban Growth Alliance's conspiracy to control American urban development. David, if we do that, we'll be taking on some of the most powerful people in the country. If we don't do that, they'll keep sending people to kill us until they succeed. Amber looked at David, and he could see her weighing their options. There's something else you need to know, she said. What? I wasn't at that community center by accident. I've been investigating connections between defense contractors and real estate development companies. I was watching your volunteer work because I thought you might be connected to the people I was tracking. And now I think we've both been investigating different parts of the same massive conspiracy. The sound of Henderson Group's operatives was almost on top of them. In 10 seconds, they would be discovered. Amber, are you willing to risk everything to expose the truth about what we've both discovered? David, I became homeless and spent 4 months living on the streets rather than give up my evidence. What do you think? David smiled, realizing that the woman he'd fallen in love with was not only stronger than he'd known, she was exactly the partner he needed to fight the kind of war they were about to start. Then let's go save the world. They broke cover just as Henderson Group's operatives reached their position. But instead of running toward the roof and escape, David and Amber moved deeper into the building, toward the secure communication center where they could transmit everything they knew to every media outlet, government agency, and law enforcement organization in the country. Because sometimes the best way to survive people trying to kill you is to make sure the whole world knows who they are and what they're trying to hide. As gunfire erupted behind them, David realized that his relationship with Amber had evolved from a romance between a billionaire and a homeless woman into a partnership between two people whose combined knowledge could bring down one of the largest corruption networks in American history. The question now wasn't whether they would survive the night. The question was whether they could expose the truth before their enemies destroyed them both. But first, they had to reach the communication center alive. And Henderson Group's operatives were not going to make that easy. David, Amber said as they ran through the building's corridors, whatever happens, I need you to know that falling in love with you was the best decision I made in 2 years of making terrible decisions. Even though I lied to you about who I was? Even though we both lied about who we were. As they fought their way toward the truth that could save thousands of lives, David realized that sometimes love meant finding someone whose secrets were as dangerous as your own. And sometimes saving the world started with two people deciding to trust each other with everything they had to lose. The communication center was 3 floors down and heavily fortified, but getting there meant going through Henderson Group's kill team. David and Amber moved through the building service corridors like a military unit, their movements coordinated in ways that surprised them both. 2 years of hiding had kept Amber's tactical skills sharp, while David's security company background had prepared him for exactly this kind of urban combat. "Contact ahead," Amber whispered, spotting muzzle flashes through a ventilation grate. "How many?" 3, maybe 4. Professional spacing, overlapping fields of fire. David looked at their tactical situation. The corridor they needed to traverse was a kill zone with no cover and multiple shooters positioned to eliminate anyone who tried to cross it. Ideas. Amber studied the layout, her mind calculating angles and timing with military precision. "We create a distraction that forces them to reposition, then we move during their displacement." "What kind of distraction?" "The kind that makes them think we're trying to escape instead of trying to reach the communication center." Amber pulled out her phone, which somehow still had signal despite the building's compromised networks. "Who are you calling?" "My insurance policy." The phone rang twice before someone answered. "This is Agent Sarah Kim, FBI Financial Crimes Division." David stared at Amber, realizing there was still more about her background that he didn't know. "Sarah, it's Amber. I need an emergency extraction and immediate protection for evidence transmission." "Amber, where the hell have you been? We've been looking for you for 6 months. I've been staying alive while gathering additional evidence on the weapons fraud case." "What additional evidence?" "Evidence that connects the defense contractors to a real estate development conspiracy worth billions of dollars." There was silence on the other end of the line as Agent Kim processed what Amber had told her. "Amber, are you saying the weapons fraud is connected to other criminal activities?" "I'm saying it's part of a network of corruption that includes government officials, defense contractors, and real estate developers working together to steal money from federal programs while controlling urban development in major cities." "How solid is your evidence?" "Solid enough to put 40 people in federal prison and recover $8 billion in stolen taxpayer money." Another pause. "Where are you now?" "Under attack by professional killers hired to prevent me from transmitting this evidence." "Amber, stay on the line. I'm coordinating with local law enforcement and federal response teams." David could hear Henderson Group's operatives moving closer to their position. They had maybe 60 seconds before they were discovered. "Sarah, I'm with someone who has complementary evidence about the real estate side of this conspiracy. We need immediate protection and secure transmission capabilities." "Who are you with?" David took the phone from Amber. "This is David Morrison. My foundation has been investigating housing development corruption that appears to be connected to the same network Agent Rodriguez has been tracking." "David Morrison." Agent Kim's voice changed, becoming more formal. "Sir, we've been trying to contact you through official channels for weeks." "Why?" "Because your foundation's work has been interfering with an ongoing federal investigation into the Urban Growth Alliance." David felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "What kind of investigation?" "A 2-year undercover operation targeting corruption in federal housing programs, defense contracting, and municipal development projects." "Are you saying the FBI has been investigating the same people who are trying to kill us?" "I'm saying your foundation's activities have been complicating our ability to gather evidence without alerting our targets to the investigation." The sound of Henderson Group's operatives was getting much closer. David and Amber had to move immediately or risk being trapped. "Agent Kim, we're about to attempt transmission of all our evidence through a secure communication center. Can you guarantee protection for us during transmission?" "Mr. Morrison, we need you to cease all activities and turn over your evidence to federal agents immediately. Your amateur investigation is jeopardizing a professional operation." David looked at Amber, who was shaking her head vigorously. "Agent Kim, with respect, professional operations don't prevent people from being murdered by hired killers. We're transmitting our evidence now. Mr. Morrison, if you interfere with our investigation, you could be charged with obstruction of justice." and if we don't interfere, we'll be dead by morning." David hung up the phone and turned to Amber. "Your FBI contact wants us to stop investigating and turn over our evidence. Which means either the FBI investigation is compromised, or they're more concerned about protecting their operation than protecting our lives. Or both." They could hear Henderson Group's operatives right outside their hiding spot. In 30 seconds, they would be discovered and killed. "Amber, are you still willing to transmit everything we have, even if it means going against the FBI?" "David, I've been hiding from my own government for 2 years because I couldn't trust them to protect me or my evidence. What do you think?" David smiled grimly. "I think we're about to find out how much trouble two people can cause when they decide to tell the truth regardless of who wants them to stay quiet." They broke cover and ran toward the communication center, Henderson Group's operatives immediately pursuing them with lethal intent. The next 3 minutes were the longest of David's life. Running through corridors while being shot at, using his knowledge of the building's layout to stay ahead of professional killers. Watching Amber move with military precision that made him realize just how much danger she'd been in long before they met. They reached the communication center just as David's security team finally breached Henderson Group's perimeter defenses. "Marcus, we're in the comm center. I need simultaneous transmission to every major news outlet, government agency, and law enforcement organization in the country." "Sir, we're detecting federal agents surrounding the building. FBI, KI, and agencies I can't identify. Are they here to help us or arrest us?" "No, sir." "But they're not engaging Henderson Group's operatives, which suggests this situation is more complicated than we realized." David looked at Amber, who was setting up equipment to transmit her evidence with movements that suggested she'd done this before. "David, we have about 5 minutes before either Henderson Group kills us or the FBI arrests us. How much of our evidence can we transmit in 5 minutes? David thought about everything they discovered, his foundation's research on housing corruption, Amber's weapons fraud evidence, the connections to the Urban Growth Alliance, the assassination attempts. All of it, if we compress the files and send to multiple recipients simultaneously. Then that's what we do." As they worked to upload their combined evidence, David's communication system crackled with an incoming call. The voice was unfamiliar, but the authority behind it was unmistakable. "Mr. Morrison, this is Director Patricia Hayes, FBI. I need you to cease transmission immediately and surrender to federal agents." "Director Hayes, we're about to expose a corruption network that includes government officials. Are you sure you want us to stop?" "Mr. Morrison, you're interfering with a classified investigation that has taken 2 years to develop. Your actions could result in the loss of American lives." "How could exposing corruption result in the loss of American lives?" "Because some of the people your evidence will expose are currently providing intelligence about terrorist organizations. If you reveal their identities, you'll compromise national security operations." David felt the weight of what Director Hayes was telling him. The people they were trying to expose weren't just corrupt. Some of them were double agents working for American intelligence services. "Director Hayes, how do we know which evidence to suppress and which evidence to reveal?" "You don't. That's why you need to turn everything over to federal agents and let professionals handle the situation." Amber looked at David, and he could see her wrestling with the same dilemma. Their evidence could expose massive corruption, but it might also get intelligence operatives killed. "David," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something else." "What?" "Some of the people in my evidence aren't just defense contractors. They're CIA assets who've been selling weapons to terrorist organizations as part of intelligence operations to infiltrate those organizations. So exposing them would compromise national security? Or it would expose that our own intelligence services have been committing crimes in the name of national security." The transmission system showed that their evidence upload was 70% complete. They had maybe 2 minutes before everything they discovered would be public knowledge. "Director Hayes," David said into the communication system, How do we know that your investigation isn't designed to protect the same people who've been stealing billions of dollars from taxpayers? Mr. Morrison, you're going to have to trust that the FBI has America's best interests at heart. The same FBI that let Agent Rodriguez hide from her own government for 2 years rather than providing protection for her evidence? There was silence from Director Hayes. Director Hayes, are you there? Mr. Morrison, you have 30 seconds to abort transmission before federal agents breach your position. David looked at the transmission progress, 85% complete. He looked at Amber, who was watching the building's security monitors showing federal agents and Henderson Group operatives converging on their position. Amber, what do you want to do? I want to know that the last 2 years of my life meant something. I want to know that all the people who died to keep this evidence secret didn't die for nothing. Even if transmitting it compromises national security? David, what if the national security argument is just another way to protect people who've been stealing from American taxpayers and getting American soldiers killed with defective weapons? The transmission progress showed 90% complete. Director Hayes, we're not stopping transmission, but we're willing to work with federal agents to ensure that intelligence operatives aren't unnecessarily exposed. Mr. Morrison, that's not how this works. You don't get to negotiate terms when you're interfering with federal investigations. Then maybe federal investigations need to do a better job of protecting people who risk their lives to expose corruption. The transmission hit 100% just as federal agents breached the communication center. As David and Amber were surrounded by FBI agents with weapons drawn, David realized that exposing the truth was only the beginning of their problems. Because now they had to survive the consequences of revealing secrets that some of the most powerful people in America had been willing to kill to protect. David Morrison and Amber Rodriguez, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and interference with federal investigations. As Agent Kim read them their rights, David looked at Amber and saw something in her expression that looked like satisfaction despite their circumstances. Was it worth it? He asked. Ask me in 6 months when we see whether anything we exposed actually changes. As they were led away in handcuffs, David realized that their love story had become something much bigger than either of them had anticipated. It had become a test of whether two people willing to risk everything for the truth could survive in a world where truth was the most dangerous weapon of all. But their fight was far from over. Because in 6 hours, their transmitted evidence would be analyzed by journalists, prosecutors, and intelligence agencies around the world. And some of the most powerful people in America would discover that their secrets were no longer secret. The question now wasn't whether David and Amber would survive federal custody. The question was whether they would live long enough to see justice done. The federal holding facility was nothing like the jails David had seen in movies. Clean, quiet, and filled with the kind of technology that suggested the government spared no expense when it came to containing people who knew too much. David and Amber had been separated immediately after their arrest, placed in individual cells where they couldn't communicate or coordinate their stories. For 18 hours, David sat alone, wondering whether their evidence transmission had accomplished anything or whether they just painted bigger targets on their backs. Then Agent Kim came to see him. Mr. Morrison, you've caused quite a stir. David looked up from the metal bench where he'd been trying to sleep. Agent Kim looked tired, like she'd been awake for days dealing with the fallout from their evidence transmission. How much of a stir? Your evidence triggered simultaneous investigations by 6 federal agencies, 3 congressional committees, and law enforcement organizations in 12 states. And some very powerful people are extremely unhappy about that. Agent Kim sat down across from David, her expression serious but not hostile. Mr. Morrison, I need you to understand what you've accomplished. In the past 18 hours, your combined evidence has resulted in federal raids on 47 locations, the seizure of $8 billion in assets, and the arrest of 16 individuals including 3 sitting congressmen. David felt a surge of hope. So the evidence was credible? The evidence was devastating. Too devastating. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. What do you mean? I mean that some of the people you've exposed have enough power to make this entire investigation disappear. And some of them have enough resources to make you and Agent Rodriguez disappear along with it. Agent Kim pulled out a tablet showing news coverage of their evidence release. Headlines from major newspapers, television reports, social media posts. The story was everywhere. The good news is that your evidence is now public knowledge. The bad news is that public knowledge doesn't automatically translate to justice. What's happening to our investigation? Which investigation? The FBI's investigation into the Urban Growth Alliance has been suspended pending review by the Department of Justice. The Defense Department's investigation into weapons fraud has been classified at the highest levels. And the congressional investigations have been delayed indefinitely due to national security concerns. David felt sick. So nothing is going to happen to the people we exposed? I didn't say nothing was going to happen. I said the official investigations have been compromised. Agent Kim leaned closer, lowering her voice. Mr. Morrison, there are people within the federal government who want to see justice done. But there are also people who want to protect their own interests regardless of the cost to justice. Which people are you? I'm someone who's been investigating financial crimes for 8 years and has never seen evidence as comprehensive as what you and Agent Rodriguez compiled. I'm also someone who understands that sometimes justice has to happen outside official channels. Before David could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. What's happening? Agent Kim was already on her feet, speaking into a radio. This is Kim. What's the status on the security breach? Agent Kim, we have multiple armed individuals attempting to breach the facility perimeter. They're not responding to federal identification requests. David realized with cold certainty what was happening. Henderson Group hadn't given up, they just escalated to attacking a federal facility. They're here for us, aren't they? Mr. Morrison, it appears that some people would rather risk attacking federal agents than allow you and Agent Rodriguez to testify about what you've discovered. Agent Kim was moving quickly now, unlocking David's cell and handing him a bulletproof vest. Are you releasing me? I'm protecting a federal witness whose testimony is critical to national security. They moved through corridors filled with federal agents preparing for what looked like a small war. The facility's security systems were tracking multiple breach attempts, and David could hear gunfire echoing from the building's perimeter. Where's Amber? Agent Rodriguez is being moved to a secure location within the facility. I want to see her. Mr. Morrison, the people attacking this facility have resources that exceed most military operations. Our priority is keeping you both alive long enough to testify. They reached a command center where David could see the full scope of what they were facing. Security monitors showed armed teams surrounding the facility, helicopters providing air support, and tactical vehicles that looked like they belonged to the military rather than private security. Agent Kim, how is Henderson Group able to mount this kind of operation? Because Henderson Group isn't just a private security company. They're a front operation for intelligence services that have been compromised by the people you exposed. David stared at the monitors showing what looked like a full-scale military assault on a federal facility. Are you saying our own intelligence services are trying to kill us? I'm saying that some elements within our intelligence services have been corrupted by the same network you've been investigating. And those elements would rather start a shooting war with federal law enforcement than allow their activities to be exposed. The facility shook as something exploded near the main entrance. Agent Kim, how long can this facility hold out? Against a normal attack? Indefinitely. Against an assault by people with access to military-grade weapons and intelligence about our defensive capabilities? Maybe an hour. David thought about Amber, somewhere in this facility, facing the same deadly assault because she'd been brave enough to gather evidence about weapons fraud. I want to see her. If we're going to die here, I want to see her. Agent Kim looked at David's face, seeing something that made her nod. Follow me. But understand that once you're together, you become a single target instead of two separate ones. They moved deeper into the facility, passing federal agents fortifying positions and preparing for close-quarters combat. David had never seen law enforcement preparing to fight what looked like a military operation, and the reality of their situation was sinking in with terrifying clarity. They found Amber in a secure conference room, surrounded by FBI agents and reviewing documents on multiple computer screens. David! She looked up as he entered, relief flooding her face. Are you okay? I'm alive. What are you working on? Additional evidence. While we've been in custody, Agent Kim's team has been analyzing our initial transmission and cross-referencing it with other federal investigations. Agent Kim activated a wall display showing a network diagram that looked like something from a conspiracy thriller. What you're looking at is a visual representation of the corruption network you've exposed. 43 individuals, 16 companies, and 8 government agencies, all connected through financial transactions, communications intercepts, and documented criminal activities. David studied the diagram, recognizing names from his foundation's research and faces from news coverage of American politics and business. This is bigger than we thought. Much bigger, Agent Kim agreed. Your evidence has exposed a network of corruption that reaches into the highest levels of American government and business. And that's why they're willing to attack a federal facility to stop us from testifying? That's why they're willing to risk civil war to prevent this information from reaching prosecutors who can't be bought or intimidated. The facility shook again as another explosion echoed through the building. Agent Kim, what's our extraction plan? There is no extraction plan, Mr. Morrison. The people attacking this facility have air support, ground forces, and intelligence about our capabilities. We're surrounded by people who have decided that killing federal agents is preferable to facing justice for their crimes. Amber looked at David, and he could see her calculating their tactical situation with military precision. Agent Kim, what communication capabilities do we have? Limited. They've jammed most frequencies, but we have secure satellite uplinks for emergency communications. Can we broadcast live to news organizations? Possibly. Why? Amber and David looked at each other, and David saw the same idea forming in both their minds. Because if we're going to die here, we want the world to see who's killing us and why. Agent Kim stared at them. You want to broadcast your deaths? We want to broadcast our testimony, David corrected. Everything we know, everyone who's involved, all the evidence we've gathered. Live, in real time, so that even if they kill us, the truth survives. And if broadcasting that information gets other people killed? Intelligence operatives, federal agents, civilians who've been cooperating with investigations. David thought about the moral complexity of their situation. Revealing everything might save thousands of lives by exposing corruption, but it might also cost hundreds of lives by compromising legitimate operations. Agent Kim, what would you do if you were us? I'd ask myself whether the people attacking this facility are more interested in protecting national security or protecting their own criminal activities. Another explosion, this one much closer. David could hear gunfire in the corridors outside the conference room. They're inside the building, Amber observed. Which means we have maybe 10 minutes before they reach this location, Agent Kim said. David looked at Amber, at Agent Kim, at the evidence displayed on screens around the room that represented 2 years of investigation and months of life-threatening work. Amber, what do you want to do? I want to finish what we started. I want to make sure that everyone who died to keep this evidence secret didn't die for nothing. Even if it gets us killed? David, I've been running from these people for 2 years. I've been homeless, scared, and isolated because I was trying to stay alive long enough to see justice done. If I die today, I want it to be because I was fighting for justice, not because I was hiding from it. David nodded, understanding that Amber was right. They'd come too far and risked too much to give up now. Agent Kim set up the broadcast. We're going to tell the world everything we know. As federal agents prepared to make their last stand against an assault by corrupted intelligence services, David and Amber sat down in front of cameras to deliver testimony that would either save American democracy or get them killed trying. This is David Morrison and Amber Rodriguez. If you're seeing this broadcast, it means we're about to be murdered by people who have stolen billions of dollars from American taxpayers and compromised American national security for personal profit. David looked directly into the camera, knowing that their words might be the last thing the world heard from them. What we're about to tell you will change everything you think you know about corruption in American government and business. And the people trying to kill us right now are proof that everything we're about to reveal is true. As gunfire echoed through the corridors getting closer to their position, David and Amber began telling the world the truth about the Urban Growth Alliance, the weapons fraud, the intelligence services corruption, and the network of powerful people willing to commit murder to protect their secrets. For the next 23 minutes, as federal agents fought and died to protect them, David and Amber exposed the largest corruption network in American history. And when Henderson Group's operatives finally breached their position, the last thing the world saw was David and Amber holding hands as professional killers opened fire. But their testimony was already being broadcast to millions of people around the world. And sometimes, the truth is more powerful than the people trying to hide it. 18 months later, David woke up to the sound of construction equipment outside his window. Not the expensive construction equipment he'd grown up hearing in wealthy neighborhoods, but the honest, purposeful sound of affordable housing being built where luxury condos had once been planned. He reached across the bed, finding Amber's hand before his eyes were fully open. A habit that had developed during the 6 months they'd spent in protective custody, when touching each other was the only way to confirm they were both still alive. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the contentment that came from sleeping safely in their own bed in their own apartment. "Good morning." David squeezed her hand, still amazed that they'd both survived long enough to have mornings like this. "What time is the ceremony?" 2 o'clock. "But the press interviews start at noon, and Senator Williams wants to meet with us at 11. David sat up, looking out the window at the construction site that had once been the centerpiece of Henderson Group's development plans. Where luxury towers worth hundreds of millions had been planned, affordable housing units were rising that would provide homes for 800 families. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't transmitted that evidence? Amber rolled over to face him, her expression serious but peaceful. "I think about the 800 families who would still be homeless. I think about the soldiers who would have died from defective weapons. I think about the $8 billion that would still be missing from programs designed to help people." She reached up to touch the scar on David's shoulder, a permanent reminder of the gunshot wound he'd sustained during the federal facility assault. "And I think about the fact that we're alive to see the consequences of what we did." David traced the matching scar on Amber's arm, remembering the moment he'd thought he'd lost her when Henderson Group's operatives had finally reached their position. Agent Kim said the final count was 63 convictions. 64 as of yesterday. Congressman Mitchell's conspiracy conviction came through. David smiled. The trials had taken over a year, but every month had brought new convictions, new evidence, and new vindication that their decision to expose the truth had been the right choice. "What about the intelligence operations we compromised?" Agent Kim briefed me last week. "Turns out that most of the intelligence operations were just covers for criminal activity. The real intelligence operatives were being used as unwilling fronts for weapons trafficking and money laundering." David got out of bed and walked to their kitchen, where coffee was already brewing. Another small luxury that felt meaningful after months of not knowing whether they'd live to see another morning. Their apartment was modest by David's previous standards, but it felt like paradise compared to the safe houses where they'd spent most of the past year. More importantly, it was in the Riverside neighborhood, walking distance from the community center where David still volunteered and close enough to the affordable housing construction site that they could watch the progress every day. David, are you ready for today? Today was the dedication ceremony for the Riverside Community Housing Project. The first 200 units were complete, with families already moving in. The remaining 600 units would be finished within 6 months, and similar projects were being built in 11 other cities using funds recovered from the Urban Growth Alliance prosecutions. I'm ready to see the families moving in. I'm not ready for the media circus. The media attention had been overwhelming since their testimony broadcast. Books, movie deals, speaking engagements, and interview requests that they'd mostly turned down in favor of focusing on the work of actually building the housing they'd nearly died to make possible. The media circus is important, Amber said, joining David in the kitchen. Every time we tell our story, more people understand that corruption isn't just about money, it's about real families who lose their homes, real soldiers who die from defective equipment, real communities that get destroyed by greed. David poured coffee for both of them, a domestic routine that still felt miraculous after everything they'd been through. Amber, do you ever regret any of it? The danger, the hiding, the year of trials and testimony. Amber considered the question while looking out their window at the construction site. I regret that people died. I regret that Agent Kim lost 3 colleagues during the facility assault. I regret that it took so long for justice to happen. She turned back to David. But I don't regret falling in love with you. I don't regret trusting you with my evidence. And I don't regret that we chose to fight instead of hide. David kissed her, tasting coffee and morning and the kind of happiness he'd never experienced before meeting her. What are you thinking about? Amber asked. I'm thinking about the morning I first saw you outside the community center. You were reading in the rain, and I thought you were the strongest person I'd ever seen. I was terrified and had nowhere to sleep. You were dignified and determined and completely unbroken despite everything that had happened to you. And you were a billionaire pretending to be a social worker. And you were a military intelligence officer pretending to be a homeless graphic designer. They laughed, remembering how complicated their deception had been and how simple their connection had felt once they'd stopped lying to each other. David, there's something I want to tell you before we go to the ceremony. What? I've been offered a position with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Full reinstatement of my military rank, federal law enforcement authority, and assignment to investigate corruption in defense contracting. David felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. That's amazing. It's also dangerous. It's the work I was meant to do. It's the work that led me to you. And it's the work that nearly got us both killed. David, we didn't nearly get killed because we were investigating corruption. We nearly got killed because we were fighting corruption. There's a difference. David understood what Amber was saying. The danger hadn't come from gathering evidence. It had come from threatening people who were willing to commit murder to protect their criminal activities. What did you tell them? I told them I'd accept the position on the condition that you're brought on as a consultant for the foundation aspects of financial crimes investigation. David stared at Amber. You want us to work together professionally? I want us to keep doing what we've been doing. Fighting corruption, protecting communities, making sure that powerful people can't destroy lives just to increase their profits. As a team. As partners in every sense of the word. David thought about his foundation, which had grown from a personal project into a major force for affordable housing development. About Amber's evidence-gathering skills and military training. About the fact that their combined expertise had already accomplished more than either of them could have achieved alone. Amber, are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you if you want to spend the rest of your life fighting for justice with someone who loves you enough to risk everything for what you both believe in. David kissed Amber again, longer this time, tasting the future they were creating together. Yes, he said. To all of it. The job, the partnership, the marriage, The life of fighting powerful people who think they can hurt vulnerable people without consequences. Good. Because I already said yes to the FBI, and I told them we'd both be starting next month. David laughed, realizing that Amber was still the same person who made decisions based on what was right rather than what was safe. What about the ceremony today? Today we celebrate the first victory. Tomorrow we start working on the next one. They spent the morning getting ready for the ceremony, reviewing their speeches and preparing for the media interviews that would help publicize the affordable housing project. At 11 o'clock, Senator Williams arrived at their apartment. The senator had been one of the few politicians willing to support their testimony when it was dangerous to do so, and had become a champion for the legislation that made the Riverside project possible. David, Amber, are you ready to see what we've accomplished? They walked to the construction site, where David could see families moving into completed units. Children playing in courtyards that had been designed based on input from community residents. Adults heading to jobs they could reach by public transportation. Elderly residents sitting on benches in gardens that hadn't existed 18 months ago. Senator Williams, David said, how many other cities are implementing similar projects? 17 cities have approved projects based on the Riverside model. Federal funding has been allocated for affordable housing in 43 additional cities. And international delegations from 6 countries have visited to study how we're converting recovered criminal assets into community development. Amber squeezed David's hand. So it's working. It's working because you two were willing to risk everything to make it work. The dedication ceremony was attended by hundreds of people, new residents, community leaders, federal officials, and media representatives from around the world. David and Amber spoke about the importance of housing as a foundation for human dignity, about the connections between corruption and homelessness, and about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they're willing to fight for justice. But the moment that mattered most to David was when a woman named Maria approached them after the ceremony. Mr. David, Ms. Amber, I wanted to thank you. Maria was holding the hand of a little girl who looked about 6 years old, both of them dressed in their best clothes for the ceremony. Thank us for what? Amber asked. For my apartment. For my daughter having a safe place to sleep. For me being able to afford rent on my salary instead of choosing between housing and food. David knelt down to the little girl's eye level. What's your name? Isabella. Mama says you made it so we could have our own room. David felt tears in his eyes as he realized that everything they'd risked, their safety, their lives, their relationship, had been worth it for moments like this. Isabella, you and your mama deserve to have a safe home. We just helped make sure that happened. As Maria and Isabella walked back to their new apartment, David stood up and put his arm around Amber. So what do you think? Was it worth it? Amber looked around at the community they'd helped create, at the families who were moving into homes they could afford, at the children who would grow up with stability instead of uncertainty. Ask me again in 50 years when we see what kind of adults these children become because they had safe homes to grow up in. And if some other corruption network tries to stop our next project, then we'll fight that one too. David kissed Amber as the sun set over the Riverside neighborhood, where affordable housing was rising, where luxury towers had been planned, where community gardens were growing, where parking garages had been designed, where hope was being built, where despair had been profitable. Their love story had begun with deception, grown through danger, and survived because they'd chosen truth over safety, justice over comfort, and each other over the easier path of fighting alone. Some love stories end with happily ever after. This one ended with the understanding that happiness comes from fighting for something bigger than yourself, with someone whose courage matches your own, in a world that desperately needs people willing to risk everything for what's right. David and Amber walked home through their neighborhood, past construction sites that were becoming homes, past community centers that were becoming gathering places, past the future they'd nearly died to create and would spend the rest of their lives protecting. Because love isn't just about finding someone who makes you happy. Sometimes it's about finding someone who makes you brave enough to change the world. 5 years later, The federal courthouse steps were crowded with reporters as David and Amber emerged from the final hearing in the Urban Growth Alliance case. Ms. Rodriguez, how does it feel to know that your investigation has resulted in the largest financial recovery in FBI history? Mr. Morrison, what's next for the Riverside Foundation's affordable housing initiatives? They answered questions professionally, but David could see the exhaustion in Amber's eyes. 5 years of trials, testimonies, and investigations had taken their toll, even as they'd achieved more than either had dreamed possible. One last question, a reporter called out. Is it true that you're both stepping back from active investigation work? David looked at Amber, who nodded slightly. We're transitioning from investigation to implementation, David said. The corruption has been exposed, the criminals have been convicted, and the money has been recovered. Now it's time to focus on using those resources to build the communities we've been fighting for. And, Amber added, we're expecting our first child in 6 months. Our investigative work will be continuing, but our priorities are expanding. As they walked down the courthouse steps, David thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a rainy morning outside a community center to federal custody to a courthouse where justice had finally been served. Any regrets? He asked. Amber put her hand on her growing belly, where their daughter was growing strong and healthy. Just one, she said. What's that? I regret that it took so long to meet you. David laughed, pulling Amber close as they walked toward their car and their life and the future they'd built together, one dangerous, honest, courageous day at a time. I don't regret that at all, he said. Why not? Because meeting you at exactly the right moment to save each other's lives seems like the kind of timing that only happens in the best stories. And as they drove home through neighborhoods where affordable housing was replacing luxury developments, where community centers were thriving instead of being demolished, where families were building lives instead of struggling for survival, David and Amber knew that their story was one of the best. Not because it had been easy, but because it had been worth it. Not because they'd found each other without complications, but because they'd chosen each other despite every obstacle. And not because their love had been perfect, but because it had been strong enough to change the world.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.